Poland is changing. Every year, the country celebrates its National Independence Day in the capital, Warsaw. There are parades and speeches, but in 2017, Poland's Independence Day made worldwide news because of these signs. 60,000 people showed up for a march led by nationalists and white supremacist groups. That's because they have reason to celebrate too. Poland's right-wing political party, PiS, is in power. After winning the presidency and a majority in parliament, they've ignored the constitution, taken over the courts, purged the military, and cracked down on the media. PiS is bringing authoritarianism back to Poland and openly rebelling against the European Union. It's a shocking turn for a country that just a few years ago was hailed as one of Europe's most promising young democracies. So, how did this happen, and can it be stopped?
It was an old story to the people of Poland. Conquest, subjugation, enslavement. It had happened before in Poland's troubled history, but never with such inhumanity.
Poland had a traumatic 20th century. It was invaded twice during World War II, first by the Germans and then by the Soviets, who re-established the country after the war, but as a communist state under their control. In fact, Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin directly contributed to a draft of Poland's constitution, which was formalized in 1952. These are his handwritten notes. For the next several decades, Poland developed very little, while it was cut off from the rest of the world. It became one of several Soviet-backed communist countries in Central and Eastern Europe that made up the Soviet bloc. That started to change in the 1980s. Polish unions started organizing huge strikes against the communist government. The movement came to be called Solidarity, and it grabbed the attention of the whole world.
As part of the International Day of Solidarity with the people of Poland, we send them this message behind their wall of silence. In this time of despair, we hold out this candle of hope.
In 1989, the communist government caved to the pressure and agreed to let non-communist parties run in the elections. Solidarity and Democratic candidates went on to win the majority of parliament and the presidency. They established the Republic of Poland and became the first country in Europe to topple communism. The rest of the Soviet bloc soon followed. This posed a challenge for Western Europe.
We cannot aim at anything less than the union of Europe as a whole, and we look forward with confidence to the day when that union will be achieved.
Since the end of World War II, the continent's democracies had been growing closer, signing free trade deals that became the precursor to today's European Union. At first, the trade deals just covered coal and steel, but as they grew to include agriculture, energy, and other markets, more countries joined, making Europe more economically and politically integrated than it had ever been before. As the former Soviet bloc countries started establishing democracies of their own, Western Europe needed to find a way to include them. So in 1993, the established EU countries came up with a strict checklist for admitting new members. New member states needed to have a free market economy, respect human rights, and the rule of law. That meant courts had to be independent and impartial, so everyone could get a fair trial. These EU rules helped bring former communist countries in while also keeping them from sliding back into authoritarianism. They were designed to keep the peace in Europe. Poland joined the EU in 2004, and because of Solidarity's success, it became one of the most promising new members. Each year after it joined, Poland received millions of euros to help fund highways, schools, hospitals, and modern infrastructure. By 2014, Poland became one of the EU's strongest and most resilient members. It even avoided the recession in 2009 that crippled economies worldwide. Polling showed 72% of Poles were satisfied with EU membership, more than any other member state. And Poland's charismatic pro-EU Prime Minister Donald Tusk was chosen to become the president of the EU's European Council. But in his absence, leaders with a very different vision for Poland's future rose to power. In 2015, PiS, Poland's right-wing party, shocked the world and won an absolute majority in the parliament. Since 2001, PiS had been led by former Solidarity leaders Lech and Jarosław Kaczynski, who felt that Poland's center-left parties had become elitist and corrupt. It appealed to Poland's conservative population in rural areas. PiS only earned 38% of the vote in 2015, on par with previous election results, but after Tusk left for the EU, his coalition fell apart, making room for the right-wing party to take over. According to PiS, after decades of Soviet control, Poland was now being controlled by the EU. So when it came to power, it pledged to take back Poland's independence, legally or illegally. The party already controlled both houses of parliament and the presidency, so it initiated a hostile takeover of the judicial branch. First, it packed this constitutional court with loyal judges, and then forced out more than a third of the judges in this other court. Both acts were illegal under the Polish constitution, but the PiS majority parliament and presidency signed them into law anyway. The party also fired over 11,000 civil service workers and at least 280 military officers. And it started leveling fines on news organizations when it didn't like their coverage. Meanwhile, it's been using Polish nationalism to justify these moves. Remember this 2017 controversial march? A PiS politician called it a beautiful sight, while the party cracked down on protests against their authoritarian moves. As PiS tightened control on Poland, the EU issued several warnings to stop it from breaking its rules, but PiS ignored them.
It is with a heavy heart that we have decided to initiate Article 7.1. But the facts leave us no choice.
In December 2017, the EU invoked Article 7, its nuclear option, for the first time in its history. It allows the EU to strip a member of its voting rights if it feels it's breaking the criteria established in 1993.
A significant numbers of laws have been adopted, 13 in total, which put at serious risk the independence of the judiciary and the separation of powers in Poland.
The problem for the EU is that Article 7 isn't going to work. The punishment requires a unanimous vote by all EU countries, and there's one country that has sworn to protect Poland. Hungary, another former Soviet bloc country, has taken a turn towards authoritarianism under President Viktor Orban, and he vowed to veto any punishment against Poland. PiS is proving that it's possible to reap the economic benefits of EU membership while flouting the rule of law. And that has sparked an existential crisis for the EU. The rules that were written to prevent authoritarianism from ever reappearing in Europe aren't being followed, and there's not much it can do about it. The EU could try cutting off Poland's funding, but it's unclear how that would pass. So for now, the EU remains in a crisis. For decades, it's tried to keep Europe democratic. But Poland, once EU's most promising new addition, is threatening to undermine the whole thing.